So with that, I'll put up a reminder of my our contact information, and I guess open the floor for questions and conversation. I'm going to invite my colleagues at Sea Grant and with Crab Team to also participate. Thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot, Emily. I just wanted to point out a couple questions that came in on the chat, or a question, I guess two. This is from Kim Patton. There is a good temporal spatial relationship of green crab populations to burrowing shrimp recruitment. Can we examine and model this more? I'm wondering if you have any more thoughts to that, and then I'll read the other one.
Sure. I'm curious to learn more about this. This is something, looking at this relationship is something that is something I would like to learn more about. I'm also curious, Sean, if you have thoughts specifically on that question since you just popped on.
Oh, I mean, I suppose the recruitment habits of different species is interesting to look at. I see that came in from Kim. I'm kind of curious, other than, you know, the interesting pattern of recruitment, spatial patterns of recruitment between the species, if there's some other thing that he thinks that we could gain from that. I mean, I understand that it's always useful to understand the recruitment dynamics of different species, but and I'm sure we could probably explore it. I guess we just want to think about why we would choose that pattern rather than, you know, other patterns that could be explored. I'm always open to ideas, but you know, I'm focusing, you know, thinking about where we're going to focus our energy. It's always a challenge to decide.
The majority of modeling work with respect to recruitment success of green crab has you know, been done by Sylvia Yamada and some of her colleagues, looking at some of the oceanographic predictors of success. I'm obviously less familiar with the patterns that drive and the mechanisms that drive burrowing shrimp success, but that's, you know, potentially some of the factors are similar that facilitate their those years as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we see patterns with other species as well, especially El Nino conditions. We see, for instance, mole crabs on the coast. We see Pachygrapsis short crabs distributed farther northward. There are, of course, many different species that seem to thrive in warmer waters and are spread further during those time periods.
And a related question that came in, not comparing necessarily to species in the area, but more to the shoreline morphology and sediment characteristics. There's wondering a question about whether dredging or other exchange in the bays, Willapa and Grace Harbor, particularly, I think, has been correlated with green crab presence or anything of the sort.
This is a good question for future. I think for future investigation. I'm not aware of studies that look specifically at that, but other folks may be.
Are we, when you mention dredging, are you thinking about dredging of navigation channels? Is that what the kind of dredging we're thinking of? I'm
not sure, but that's what I would assume. There could also be shellfish harvest through dredging as well. So if the person who asked that wanted to clarify.
I mean, in terms of Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor, I'll just mention that probably the biggest distinction in sort of habitat in Willapa Bay, for instance, over the last 20 years or so. And when green crab were first established in Willapa Bay, they were primarily found in Spartina meadows. And in fact, that was a preferred habitat that we evaluated through trapping and telemetry work and habitat suitability modeling. And of course, you know, with Spartina largely eradicated through more major portions of Willapa Bay, that the habitat has certainly shifted in that regard. But yeah, I'm sorry, continue with the question about the dredging.
So earlier we saw how storms and just high water events are moving dredging exactly the same as you just showed this green crab.
Hmm. Oh, spreading dredge materials, dredge sediments? Is
Into
that?
our base.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So the question might be, could dredging also be spreading green crab? Is that sort of
Right.
maybe what the supposition is?
It showed up the same pattern as the dredge spills that are moving through currents.
Yeah.
And
So-
I'll just, a little bit of context there is that there's a study happening right now through Grace Harbor and Pacific Conservation Districts. It's a sediment study of, and they're analyzing how sediment is moving and particularly the shifting of different sandbars. And they presented yesterday. So so that might be something to connect in with all. Well, yeah.
Thanks, Jackson.
So
Emily, do you want to take? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, David?
sorry, Sean. So we've seen all the, you know, the videos and the pictures and stuff that's on the East Coast there of all the damage caused by green crab. And we know that green crab have been established in Central California since the 90s now. My first question is what kind of damages have we seen in that area since they've been established and are self-sustaining down there? What have they had the same exact impacts as they have on the East Coast? And my next question would be, we're doing this big project looking at the kind of the range and how much they've expanded and the population increase. At what point are we going to work with Fish and Wildlife and Sea Grant and come up with a management plan for this? What's the next step here? And we're formulating some ideas here, but we need to come up with a plan of how we're going to address the issue.
Yeah, so to take the first question or start on the first question related to comparing impacts observed on the East Coast versus California. So the timeline for invasion on the East Coast is, pretty different, although there are some parts in particularly the Canadian Maritimes where the invasion is much more recent on the East Coast. So that's perhaps one of the more salient comparisons. As far as I know, in California, one of the challenges to looking at impacts is that there's not a lot of baseline data of what was going on beforehand. And so the places that they were most abundant early in the invasion are San Francisco Bay, which was already sort of a hugely modified environment biologically in terms of the ecological community. So some of the, the impacts that have been observed are impacts to native shore crab species, impacts to native clam species. Some folks have probably heard about some of the reports of impacts on some clam operations, which I think have by and large been mitigated through changes in grow out practice.
So they have documented that there's been impacts to aquaculture in California. Have they shown any impacts similar to what they saw with the burrows and the banks and the decreases in seagrass and on that level?
Yeah, so I don't think so. So I think largely the work going on to document impacts so the eelgrass impacts have been observed, or at least are sort of correlatively believed to be ongoing in BC. That's, I think, the most directly related research having to do with green crab impacts on eelgrass on the West Coast. In terms of California, I think some folks at the South Slough,
Elkhorn?
Elkhorn might be doing some of that work, but their populations of green crab are also not super stable, to my knowledge. So it's so far I'm not hearing as much impacts about eelgrass. Sean may also have some thoughts on whether or why we may or may not see those.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, David. In terms of green crab impacts on seagrass and green crab impacts in marsh banks, those have certainly been much more readily documented in the Northeast U.S., not up into the Canadian Maritimes. On the U.S. West Coast, as Emily pointed out, There's some correlative evidence in BC of changes in eelgrass associated with green crab, but that's in sort of the outer coast of Vancouver Island. And I think there's the ongoing efforts to sort of look at that mechanistically. Down in California, though, despite the fact that green crab have been there for quite a while, I don't know of anyone who's definitively shown a link between changes in eelgrass or seagrass and green crab. And in fact, when I did my research down there, back in the early 2000s in California, I largely saw that green crab weren't found in eelgrass beds down there. And of course, that was, I was working in a couple of coastal estuaries, and the biota of the coastal estuaries in California is just different than it is up here. Down there, we were seeing a lot of very large red and yellow and brown rock crab, all of which are known to prey on green crab. So there's a possibility that there may be, just some different patterns going on that maybe exclude green crab from seagrass or eelgrass beds down in California. I honestly couldn't tell you specifically, and it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I have not seen anything definitive showing declines in eelgrass beds in California, in response to increased populations of green crab there.
And David, you had a second question about, or I think, in some ways, a comment about moving towards a management plan. Is that something you'd also like us to?
Yeah, I think that's that's probably should be the step and the goal from this project, is kind of how we're going to address the issue. And I don't know if we have any clam farmers on the call because I came in late, but you were hearing reports of clam recruitment, but not survival, and you're not seeing the full age classes there. That's what I'm hearing from